picture this. You're sitting in a crowded conference room, right?
Oh, yeah. We have all been there.
Exactly. And a colleague pitches a new strategy that is, well, quite frankly, a guaranteed disaster. Do you look them in the eye and state, purely and objectively, that their idea is terrible?
Probably not.
No, of course not. You likely nod thoughtfully and say something like, let's circle back to that.
Right, yeah. Because we operate under this profound delusion that human language is primarily a vehicle for objective truth.
Like a surgeon's scalpel or something.
Exactly. A scalpel designed to just expose literal facts. But in practice, our daily communication operates much more like a thick layer of acoustic foam.
Acoustic foam, I love that.
Well, it's a far more functional design for an inherently social species, you know? If our primary goal was simply the frictionless transfer of empirical data, human relationships would completely disintegrate.
They'd just collapse under the weight of constant, absolute candor.
Right. Language acts as an indispensable shock absorber. By rigorously categorizing colloquial phrases, we can map out exactly where modern society requires the most linguistic padding.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are taking a deep dive into that beautifully murky territory.
It really is a fascinating landscape.
It is. We are immersing ourselves in a curated compendium of 50 everyday English expressions. But our mission today isn't just a basic vocabulary lesson.
No, not at all.
We are going to decode these phrases as a highly sophisticated sociological toolkit. The very mechanisms we use to navigate the immense complexities of modern existence.
Because chances are you, the listener, are engaging with this right now because you are currently feeling entirely snowed under, meaning you are having way too much work to do in our hyperproductive world.
Yeah, we really need to understand the linguistic armor you wear just to survive that daily grind.
What's fascinating here is the underlying anthropological function of these idioms. I mean, they aren't random.
Right, they pop up in very specific situations.
Exactly. If you look at where this metaphorical language is most heavily concentrated, you immediately see the arenas of life that carry the highest social risk. It's a localized defense mechanism.
So let's start in the environment where the stakes are arguably the highest. Let's transition to where most of us spend the lion's share of our waking hours, the modern workplace.
Ah, yes, the corporate battlefield.
It's an ecosystem where survival basically dictates that we almost never state reality plainly. Take our basic motivation for even being there.
We rarely confess to our colleagues that we're merely desperate for a paycheck.
Right. Instead, we refer to our career as our bread and butter, framing it as your main source of income through this, rustic, almost quaint metaphor.
Because the corporate theater demands a specific dialect of continuous, optimized motion, even when we're addressing failure.
Oh, especially with failure.
Right. Think about how we manage non-lethal conflict. If a colleague is demonstrating profound incompetence, leadership doesn't use a visceral, aggressive term.
No, HR would have a field day.
They really would. Instead, they gently suggest that the individual needs to get your act together, which is simply a sanitized way to tell them to organize yourself and stop being messy or lazy.
Or conversely, if someone is actively avoiding their obligations, we don't accuse them of wage theft.
Yeah.
We complain that they're trying to slack off, meaning they work with less effort than you should.
Exactly. The idioms abstract the offense. It makes the critique palatable enough to survive a performance review without, triggering a defensive meltdown.
It significantly lowers the temperature of the confrontation. But okay, let's unpack this a bit.
Sure.
Because I'm looking at this list of phrases, and I genuinely have to wonder about our true motives here. Are phrases like the ubiquitous request to touch base, where you briefly talk to someone to get an update, or the constant promise to circle back, meaning you return to a topic or person later, are these actually just a highly institutionalized form of professional procrastination?
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
Right, it feels like a polite, socially elevated way to defer immediate problem solving, just under the guise of strategic collaboration.
It is entirely a deferral tactic.
Yeah.
But I would argue it's a vital mechanism for cognitive preservation rather than mere laziness.
Cognitive preservation, how so?
Well, in an environment defined by relentless artificial urgency, those phrases offer the illusion of momentum. You are demonstrating engagement without expending immediate intellectual labor.
Wow, you're just buying time.
Exactly. Consider the profound cognitive dissonance employees navigate every single day. On one hand, management constantly implores you to think outside the box, demanding you find creative, non-traditional solutions.
Right, they want you to be this boundless, disruptive innovator.
But that abstract creative mandate eventually crashes headlong into the harsh, uncompromising reality of the bottom line, which represents the most important point or final result, usually meaning quarterly profit.
So we demand unbound creativity, but only if it instantly translates to immediate financial gain.
Which is an impossible paradox. And navigating that contradiction requires exceptional diplomacy. When a creative risk inevitably fails to produce that financial gain, we have to endure the deeply uncomfortable ritual where we call someone out, meaning we tell someone publicly they're doing something wrong.
Oof, yeah. That is a dangerous rupture in the social fabric of the office.
It's terrifying for the group dynamic.
Which explains why we invest so much energy in preventative linguistic strategies to avoid ever reaching that point. Like, we obsessively ensure that everyone is kept in the loop, carefully ensuring they are kept informed about a situation.
Sharing information becomes a defensive posture.
Exactly. If you are copied on the email, you share the blame.
Right.
And when the sheer volume of variables becomes just, like, too overwhelming to formally manage, we abandon the illusion of control entirely.
We just agree to play it by ear, collectively deciding to not make a plan and just see what happens.
Right, until the cognitive reserves are entirely depleted. At that point, the entire team reaches a silent consensus and decides to call it a day, electing to stop working because you've done enough.
It is a collective surrender, elegantly masked as a scheduled, productive conclusion.
But the truly exhausting part is that when we do finally exit the corporate battlefield, that linguistic diplomacy doesn't just end.
Oh, not at all. It just mutates.
Yeah, we carry that completely drained social battery right into our personal lives. We just shift from professional obfuscation to the intricate ballet of interpersonal relationships.
And the vanguard of this social dance is, of course, small talk, which is just casual conversation about unimportant things.
People constantly disparage small talk. They say it's superficial.
They do, but it serves a vital evolutionary purpose. Think of it as verbal grooming.
Verbal grooming.
Yeah, it's a non-threatening protocol used to test the atmospheric pressure of a room. We're assessing the emotional state of another person before we risk introducing substantive vulnerability.
Right. It's the preamble to actual human connection. Or, just as often, the preamble to a polite avoidance of connection.
Yes, exactly.
Let's say you realize you lack the emotional bandwidth for interaction on a Friday night.
Yeah.
You don't declare your existential fatigue to your friend.
No, that would be far too intense.
Right. You simply ask to take a rain check, which allows you to politely decline now, but suggest later. It is a masterful preservation of future potential while firmly denying present availability.
It's brilliant diplomacy. And when we do engage, we constantly deploy economic metaphors to navigate social equity.
Like when we decide to split the bill, agreeing to divide the cost equally to maintain perfect egalitarianism.
Or consider the brief, euphoric disruption of capitalism when a bartender decides a beverage is on the house, indicating it is given for free.
It's the best feeling.
It really is. But notice how all of these interactions are governed by an unwritten constitution of politeness, relying entirely on indirectness to function smoothly.
See, I want to push back on something here.
By all means.
Because we are culturally conditioned to value blunt honesty. Like, we are told from childhood that unwavering directness is a supreme virtue.
We are, yes. Always tell the truth.
So I really question the negativity often associated with being indirect. Isn't the act of deciding to beat around the bush where you avoid saying what you mean because it's uncomfortable, sometimes absolutely unequivocally necessary for the maintenance of societal harmony?
I think you're absolutely right.
Like, if we didn't utilize those evasive maneuvers, wouldn't we constantly cause each other to lose face, forcing someone to lose the respect of others in public?
You are touching on the core tension between empathy and absolute truth here. The preservation of dignity, both your own and your conversational partners, almost always supersedes the necessity for immediate factual accuracy. Because facts can hurt immensely. From a neurological standpoint, direct criticism spikes cortisol and triggers a literal threat response in the brain.
Wow. So the biological reaction.
Exactly. This is why we consciously choose to cut someone some slack, deciding to be less strict because they are having a hard time. We recognize that their humanity overrides the rigid enforcement of a rule.
To demand brutal honesty at all times is to demand a rather brutal world.
Precisely. So to survive without constantly triggering each other's threat responses, we become masters of subtext.
We learn to implicitly read between the lines, forcing our brains to understand the hidden meaning beneath the actual words being spoken.
And to assist in that delicate transmission of subtext, we deploy an entire arsenal of conversational fillers.
Oh, like the little phrases we just sprinkle everywhere.
Yes. They are frequently dismissed as empty words, but they are the psychological adhesive of human interaction. When we grant permission by saying, by all means, using a polite way to say, yes, please do, or when we establish temporary boundaries by saying something is acceptable for the time being, meaning for now but not permanently, we are actively negotiating our shared reality in real time.
We are constantly monitoring the emotional resonance of the dialogue. Like, when a friend vents a frustration, we validate their reality with a simple, fair enough, which is used to understand and accept someone's point without necessarily fully agreeing with it.
It's a brilliant diffusing tactic.
It is. Or when we are about to violate a social expectation and introduce a potentially abrasive opinion, we soften the entry. We declare, to tell you the truth, a phrase used when being honest, to signal that we are stepping outside the bounds of polite superficiality.
It's a warning label. And perhaps most importantly, we constantly seek reassurance that our transmission was successfully received.
Oh, yes.
We append our statements with a vulnerable little ping asking, you know what I mean, which is checking if the person agrees or understands.
Like a localized radar sweep.
Exactly. Searching for consensus and psychological safety in an inherently unpredictable social environment.
It is remarkably beautiful when you strip away the judgment. We are just desperately trying to ensure we aren't alone in our perception of reality.
We really are.
But, despite our absolute best linguistic efforts, and despite this magnificent architecture of social diplomacy, the human experience is stubbornly subjected to the laws of entropy.
Life is messy.
Life is incredibly messy. Plans disintegrate. And therefore, we have developed an entirely separate, vibrant vocabulary dedicated exclusively to failure, ambiguity, and profound fatigue.
The language of the breakdown.
Yes.
This is where the metaphors become deeply revealing about how we process trauma and disappointment.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. I am endlessly fascinated by the absurdity of our slang in moments of crisis.
It is quite odd, isn't it?
It's so odd. Why do we utilize such whimsical, almost comical imagery when our lives fall apart? When a carefully constructed stratagem collapses, we don't say the structural integrity was compromised. We say the situation decided to go pear-shaped, meaning a plan goes completely wrong.
It's such a funny image.
Right. Why use a piece of fruit to describe a disaster?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the absurdity provides crucial cognitive distancing.
Oh, interesting.
It acts as a defense mechanism that strips the failure of its existential dread. If a professional failure is framed as merely a fruit-based geometric anomaly, it is much easier for the ego to metabolize.
That makes so much sense. It allows us the psychological space necessary to retreat and go back to the drawing board, signaling that we must start over because the first plan failed.
Oh, see, it drastically mitigates the shame.
Right, because if I personally initiate the disaster, I am forced to admit that I managed to screw up, acknowledging I made a big mistake.
Which hurts.
It really hurts. But I can instantly minimize the colloquial severity of my catastrophic error by casually offering a half-hearted "my bad," utilizing a casual way to say my mistake.
It's a linguistic sleight of hand to dodge full accountability.
It totally is.
And if we zoom out further, this specific vocabulary highlights our deep psychological conflict regarding certainty. Humans possess a profound need for clear moral and structural boundaries.
We want to know the rules.
We desperately want the universe to be black and white, presenting a situation with very clear right and wrong sides. We want justice and consequence to be perfectly legible.
But the lived reality of adult existence almost exclusively operates in a gray area, a situation where the rules aren't clear and morality is highly subjective.
Navigating that persistent ambiguity requires acknowledging that our attempts at success are often just a long shot, meaning it is very unlikely to succeed.
We're forced to accept that the narrative arc of our lives won't be a steady upward trajectory. It will inevitably be defined by relentless ups and downs, experiencing a mix of good and bad experiences.
And that relentless oscillation between good and bad takes a measurable physiological toll on us.
It's exhausting.
It is. The friction of operating in the gray area eventually erodes our resilience. We inevitably reach a breaking point, an event we dramatically categorize as the last straw, signifying the final problem that makes you lose patience.
Yeah. The natural, inescapable consequence of constantly processing this chaotic stimuli is arriving at the evening feeling completely out of it, feeling confused, tired, or not mentally present.
At which point, the only rational, survival-oriented response is to completely power down the cognitive engine.
We actively choose to veg out, explicitly deciding to relax by doing absolutely nothing.
We have to.
We attempt to unwind, trying to relax after work or stress, before we finally surrender to biology and decide to hit the hay, utilizing a rather agricultural metaphor to say, go to bed.
It's the daily cycle of exertion and entropy, and it's mediated entirely by our idioms to make the exhaustion feel somehow manageable.
But importantly, we also possess a robust vocabulary of resilience, right?
We do. We're very hopeful creatures.
We reassure ourselves that eventually, navigating this chaos will become a piece of cake, promising ourselves it will be extremely easy.
We encourage each other when the gray areas get too dark. We demand that our peers keep your chin up, using a physical metaphor as an encouraging way to stay positive.
We advocate for a philosophical surrender to the currents of fate, advising one another to simply go with the flow, to accept whatever happens without trying to control it.
And through that deliberate surrender of control, we somehow find reasons to look forward to the future, deciding to be excited about a future event, whatever it may be.
Yeah, as we attempt to synthesize this chaotic stream of daily experiences into a coherent narrative, we rely heavily on transitional markers, like we edit our own stories in real time.
Oh, all the time.
When a narrative thread threatens to overwhelm us with irrelevant details, we dismiss the noise by saying, regardless, indicating it doesn't change the situation.
Or we attempt to distill the overwhelming complexity of life down to its purest essence when we start a sentence with, basically, attempting to summarize something complex.
Or we aggressively truncate our own rambling histories by deploying the phrase long story short, deliberately used to skip details and get to the point before we completely lose our audience.
We mimic the erratic, nonlinear firing of our own synapses when we suddenly pivot a conversation with a casual, by the way, tossing it in to introduce a new or related topic.
And we constantly curate our assertions, injecting a hasty mind you, a phrase used to add a contrasting point, just to ensure we aren't perceived as too absolute or inflexible in our thinking.
Because ultimately, we must acknowledge the solitary nature of consciousness. We can only ever speak from behind the veil of our own subjectivity.
Which we formally declare by stating, as far as I'm concerned, framing our entire worldview as simply, in my personal opinion.
Which builds to the grand philosophical summation. The phrase we employ to synthesize the entire chaotic, beautiful mess of daily existence.
At the end of the day, which literally means when everything is considered.
It is the period at the end of the sociological sentence.
It really is. So what have we actually uncovered by dissecting this source document today? We've learned that to truly get the hang of a language, meaning to finally learn how to do something, requires far more than memorizing syntax or conjugating verbs.
It's so much deeper than that.
It is about mastering these 50 distinct mechanisms of coping, connecting, and ultimately surviving the human experience. I'd ask you, listening right now, to take a moment and genuinely reflect on your own daily speech patterns.
It's a great exercise.
Which of these specific phrases do you instinctively reach for? What is your preferred personal armor, and what is your favorite social lubricant when the friction of your day becomes too intense?
And I would leave you with one final, perhaps slightly unsettling philosophical provocation.
Oh, I'm ready.
We are rapidly transitioning into a society that communicates predominantly through digital text, and increasingly we interact with artificial intelligence.
Right.
These are mediums and entities that heavily, almost exclusively, favor the literal, the explicit, and the hyper-efficient transfer of data. They do not naturally require acoustic foam.
Wow, that's true.
So what happens to the texture of our humanity if these nuanced, deeply figurative expressions begin to fade from our daily use? If we culturally lose our capacity to read the subtext, do we fundamentally lose a critical part of what makes us human?
That is a fascinating question to chew on. Because if we lose the acoustic foam, we are left only with a scalpel.
And a world made entirely of sharp, unyielding, literal edges sounds like a very difficult place to live.
It really does. Take a closer look at the phrases you use tomorrow. You might be surprised at how much armor you're actually wearing. Keep digging, keep questioning, and keep reading the subtext.